Everyone's here for the same thing, right? 3D character visual development for animation. All right, okay.
3D.
Welcome. Well, on behalf of Leticia, myself, we're gonna show you guys some slides here. We're gonna talk a lot about our process and the way we work, and hopefully it's insightful and fun for you guys. And at the end, we'll open up for a lot of questions. So please, the more you guys ask, the more we can talk, and it'll be fun. Keep it nice and easy, okay? All right. Well, let's see here. Leticia, why don't you talk about yourself a little bit with what brought you to all this?
Hi, I'm Leticia. I'm from Brazil originally, and I came to the U.S. about almost 15 years ago now to follow my dreams, to do art, 3D, work on the good studios, the big studio stuff, that dream that everyone had at some moment watching Pixar movies, Disney movies, all the good stuff. Currently, I work at Walt Disney Animation Studios, and I'm a character modeling supervisor on the film that is not announced yet right now, but it's gonna be great, you know what I mean? So, I also love teaching, I was telling Charles, since I'm 14 in school, I used to teach math for some of my friends that didn't do very well, I don't know, there's something about that exchange and learning together that just inspires me so much. And I still do it to this day. I have my own little classes. I also teach at schoolism. And I do some teaching for Brazil students as well that has low income and things like that. And here is my male version. Here, it's Charles. Go ahead, Charles.
Leticia is definitely my sister from another mother, for sure. We wanted to start with these kid photos because I think like many of you guys, you probably, when you were young, were inspired by, cartoons or something like that. I mean, myself, I'm from Venezuela originally, moved to the States when I was much younger. And cartoons for me really kept me company. It wasn't just entertainment. It was like a form of friendship in some kind of weird way. So I don't think it's a coincidence that both Leticia and myself, kind of landed where we landed. And currently I'm a character art director at Warner Brothers. Oh my gosh, that's really loud. Oh, wow. Okay. I'm a character art director and also in visual development at Warner Brothers. And we're doing some big things. It's going to be fun.
And we look big like this, but what is inside is still those kids, And I'm sure all of you feel the same, right? People say you grow up, as an artist, not that much. You know what I mean?
Definitely have not grown up. Obviously, Leticia's resume speaks for itself. I mean, I've had the privilege of working with Leticia before, and she's a big motivation for me, a big inspiration, I know, to many of you. And, just look at some of the accolades, and we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty here, but I think the story is really important because, like I said, where you come from and how you were raised and all that stuff really kind of speaks to having a certain perspective about where we are. So, I'm really proud of Leticia with everything she's done. A little bit for myself, kind of the same thing. I have other added motivation to, really drive me to be the best version I can be, and that's my 2 little daughters there and my beautiful wife. We are Giants fans in Los Angeles. That is dangerous as it is already. And here are just some of the stuff that I've been involved with as far as projects. I see a lot of familiar faces in the back there, some amazing artists as well. So we'll get talking. But I grew up in San Francisco, went to Academy of Art. Leticia went to Noman. A lot of the kind of tried and true places of learning here. All right.
I forgot to ask one thing. Anyone here from Brazil? Yes! Yes! We did it.
Anyone from Venezuela? Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, okay. All right. So what is 3D character visual development for animation? There's going to be a lot of different words up here that might, be a lot to read through. But to put it specifically, I mean, really what we try to provide is a way to visualize characters in the round as thoughtfully as we can, as quickly as we can, to give the key creatives a way to see their product sooner than waiting for it to go through the pipeline. That's really kind of the broad stroke of it, right? Now, with that, there's a lot of kind of specific things. And one of the things Leticia and I were talking about is this idea of specialist versus generalist. I think this is where the real key fundamental difference is. Specialist is what you would find in a more production-oriented environment where you have really masters of their craft, right? Kind of doing different things. You have modelers, you have surfacers, animators, lighters. Now, we don't animate. I wish I could say that I could animate, and maybe Leticia can.
I
She
did
can
a
do
bouncing
everything, so I don't know. But I think the generalist mentality is really important in more of a visual development kind of standpoint. So we'll use things like sculpting, modeling, look development, lighting, anything that really helps us present our characters is really important and valuable. Paint a picture of the future.
All right, so the difference, specialist, generalist, right? We got the idea. So when you become more generalist like us, the studios are hiring you, or the person is hiring you to paint a picture of the future. So it's like they want, as soon as possible, understand the potentials of that character. We might even help them establish like a look kind of vibe. Sometimes like, oh, the texture is gonna have some strokes in it or something, then we gonna try to put that in, And a lot of it is almost to sell the personality of that character and the potential of what it can be, right? And when we put that character, that VizDev model, out to the pipeline, it's their job to make it better now, right? They gotta like, okay, this is the minimum, and now we need to make everything just better from here.
That's right. Think like a designer. So what exactly does that mean? I think in production, there's the idea of execution, right? You already have a target that's set. You want to execute it at the highest level. Thinking like a designer is a little bit more fluid in that you're going to iterate, you're going to explore quite a bit. I think the key thing here in this statement is nothing is precious in visual development. That I can't tell you how true that is. That I've taught myself to just not get attached to anything. And you're going to iterate and explore as many times as you need to until you find that character.
And that's very important also on your personal work, When you're getting feedback, you all know when you get feedback, you're like, oh, I spent a month on this, it's so precious. And then you give to someone, and they're like, well, bam, bing, boom, bam, bam, and you just want to die, right? But if you enter this kind of designer mentality, and you're like, all right, here I go again, and that's what we have to do. It's like we work on something, we're all humans, we get attached, and then someone comes in and is like, well, bing, boom, bing, thank you, let's go again. Repeat, you know what I mean? So you gotta get in that mindset. Also, something about thinking like a designer is that a lot of us, when we start on 3D, especially if you don't come from the 2D background, you might get trained to think like a copy, right? Yep. Copy machine, yep. In a sense. It's like, well, this line here is not matching this line. But it goes much more beyond, because you're not copying lines, you're copying essence. How many times you guys have seen a concept that is like, it looks pretty close, but it doesn't have the same life? That's because you're copying. You're not feeling the essence. Yeah. And that's thinking like a designer. It's thinking like, this drawing has a very strong, let's say, outline on the drawing, right? We don't have that in 3D. So how can I compensate that feeling to my model? Oh, maybe I gotta push this area 5-10% more to get that vibe. Whoa, now I have that feeling. So you gotta be careful to be too much like a copier, and you gotta feel what you're doing so you can bring that life back. And a lot of it is learning design skills. A great place to do that, study 2D. You don't need to draw if you don't like it. A lot of us don't draw much, but taking classes, trying to apply those things straight to 3D is the best way for you to start thinking like them, because you're getting their designs, right? And if you want to make your own designs, that is also the gateway, Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, just to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, the notion of copying the concept, I think that definitely is the wrong angle. And even in, both of us teach. We've been teaching for many years. And one of the things I'll tell my students often is, don't try to match the lines. You know, in 2D, there's a lot of liberties that are being taken. You know, things can work really nicely from one angle, but we have to think in the round. We have to make it look as appealing as it can from every angle. So there's such a component there of really understanding like just fundamental shapes. We're going to get into a lot of this stuff in here shortly, but let's go through a little bit more of the stuff here. So art team versus asset team, and I think that just kind of speaks, you know, to some of the stuff we already said where, again, you know, we are working kind of more in an exploratory form. You know, we're not producing things that we have to think about technical things, you know, as far as like pipeline-oriented stuff. Topology, sure, things like that help us, but we're not at the mercy of it. We're not thinking about anything that needs to be really, really tight and neat.
We're just having fun.
Exactly.
You know, that's BizDev Molly.
Exactly.
It's like you're not constrained. I think that's the word. It's like you're not considering like how is this gonna be absorbed in production. You're just thinking, what am I doing to do the best for this character? That's all you have to think, and that's why it's considered more an art team, because we're thinking in aspects of more like art instead of as a team, which is more production. You know, that's the separation.
Absolutely. More FaceTime with the leaders. So what exactly does that mean? Every component in production has FaceTime with the leaders, but there's something that happens on the front end where you get just a deeper understanding of what they're trying to achieve, not only artistically as a broad stroke on a whole project, but even really intimately with the character. And that's where we really step in, and you know, we're involved in conversations directly with the director, production designer, character designers, oftentimes just to help find and understand who the character is. All of that has an impact on design choices, and it also gives us an understanding of how we may want to operate, how we want to be flexible with our process to kind of achieve what we need to achieve. So these are things that are really important. I also want to really stress how collaborative it is at this point. You know, so it's definitely an ebb and flow of like push and pull with other amazing artists, people that are really influencing your choices, and vice versa.
And you really have to wear the art hat. There's no separation, 2D, 3D. It's just one thing, building your character, you know?
That's right. So how does it start? Okay, so what kinds of stuff typically happens? So, you know, you get an artist like Leticia. She's already gone through that dialogue with the directors, with all the key people. She understands exactly what to do. And this is where we'll be given our first task. We get our launch, right? The launch can consist of anything from a very thoughtful, thorough illustration of a character to literally a napkin sketch. And I really mean that. And I think some of us in the back there are very familiar with this.
Know what's up.
You literally are sometimes just given very vague opportunities. And if I'm really speaking honestly about this, and I think I speak for Leticia here too, that to me is like the bread and butter. That's the stuff I really like, because it means that there's many things for me to answer, you know, provide answers for.
It's almost like a challenge accepted.
Exactly,
right?
Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Sometimes also what happens that, let's say you have a concept artist and this person's gonna do like a whole wall of many variations of that character, and then the director's gonna be, I like the vibe of the cranium here, but these ears are breaking the silhouette very well. And then at the end, it comes for us like 8 images. And it's like, make it work, you know?
Yes.
So you got to kind of think about how you're going to structure that. It's very fun.
Yes. And oftentimes, like, one common question is, do you ever get like a full-on character sheet, you know, front, side, all that stuff?
That is amazing.
Never. I don't think have you ever?
No.
I've never received that. I mean, even in my time in production, never was that the case. It's always, you know, definitely more of like an inspirational piece. All right, so process. So we're going to talk through a little bit of process. We're going to go through some slides to kind of demonstrate this stuff. So I'm going to just skip through here. We'll go to the images and just start.
Image. We are artists.
Let's do it. Okay. All right, Leticia, you talk to this one a little bit.
All right, so this is a little character I did for Sea Beast, and his name is Blue, and he's cute, as you can see. But beyond the cuteness, you can see that I don't have the concept here, but it was kind of like a napkin sketch done by Shi-Yun Kim, which is one of the Ellisons.
Yeah, a napkin sketch from Shi-Yun Kim is pretty nice.
Yeah, it's very good, you know. So the first thing I think is like, how can I break this into primitives, right? how can I break this into contrast? Meaning, like, what is the ratio of the head body plus the body plus the antenna on the top? You know, I'm thinking global all the time. I'm not thinking what's going on inside my drawing. I'm thinking about the proportions, silhouette, figure it out. So you can see on the far right, left, what is it? Left. Whoa. You can see that, again, like I'm just doing the very minimum to get the silhouette. Like if I turn this black, the character is there. It's done, right? And then after I get that very nailed down, again, working loose because it's VizDev. You don't need to be tight. And then next step, I did exactly what he did on the drawing, which is the middle character. And then when I did it, I felt like something's missing for this character to feel a bit more alive. So I suggested adding those little like ear things that could do more things for him to be alive. And then when I suggested, Shiyun went back, did a few ideations, and then I came back to 3D, put it in, and we got to the final design of blue, which is the one on the right.
Yes. It's beautiful. And this is just kind of a different breakdown of how this works. And the thought process here is really just illustrating that rough define. Like I really force myself to think in primitive forms. And, you know, the first step for me is, okay, what primitive shape can I leverage to just really, you know, take on the task? And then from there, I go into more primary forms, just everything very basic, very simple. You start slowly refining, adding a little bit more granularity. Once you get into the secondary shapes there, you really start to see the character come to life. At this point, you know, just adding more granularity in the form of secondary shapes. So like I think number 5 is really important. I know, you know, Leticia and I both apply this process, and it literally doesn't matter to me if it's a stylized character, if it's a
Same thing.
naturalistic. It's the same consistent stuff I'm thinking about.
You can use the same structure to natural to iconic.
Yes.
You know, it's
Yes.
the same thing. The only thing that changes is that when you're going more natural, meaning more realistic, you consider structure more over design. When you're going more iconic, let's say something like Oni, you know, I don't know if you guys saw.
Yeah.
Then you're thinking much more design than structure.
That's right.
But they all have a percentage inside, you know.
Yes. And I think, you know, this stage of 5 and 6 and even into 7, when you start introducing color, that to me is like the real turning point. That's where you have all your building blocks. You can really move things around. It's very malleable, you know. So for me, that's a stage that I'll kind of rest in for a while until I know I feel pretty good about what I have. Then you can get into the, you know, refine. All right. Now, earlier, Leticia touched on silhouette. I can't, you know, overstate the importance of silhouette as well. And there's really 2 components to it for me. There's the blocking aspect, which we're showcasing on the left. And then there's the final statement. You know, the statement to me, think of that as like that broad stroke thumbnail of what that character is. What's the presence of that character? To me, that's a really valuable thing to utilize when you're sculpting. I oftentimes will just turn off the lights, as Leticia said, and just look at things just in black silhouette. It really exposes stuff, and it forces you to identify negative space in the same way you're looking at the positive space too. All right.
All right. On this part, it's a bit of what I just mentioned to you guys a little bit, which is the part of structure, right? So obviously this movie, it's kind of like we're a bit more naturalistic, but there is a push of caricature. So again, like every time I feel a bit lost, I add those structure lines back, you know, like skull lines. And whoever took my class before know this. Like every time you feel a bit you lost control what you're doing, add structure back. Even if later on you're gonna start smoothing again, when you add that structure, you're like, okay, I know where I am. I know the cavity, orbicular cavity is here, and you go back to those moments. So my motto is, if someone sees me sculpting, is like, smooth, add structure, because I'm always trying to make sure I'm not getting lost around. One very elegant thing you can do is to play again like with those structure lines and letting it be sharp, and then it gets soft and gets lost, and then it finds again, right? We see that a lot in 2D, where a line stops, and then later on you see a line down here, but if you connect the dots, they're connected. That's magic, right? That's design at their best. So in 3D, you can do that too. right? You can find those, how do you connect those things that your brain connects the dots, and it creates this dance of shapes going on. And in this page is interesting because like the king, he's what do we call a soft structure, right? So when I'm sculpting again, I'm like adding structure, taking very fast. And then the queen, she has more of that play of like soft and harsh, soft and harsh. So with her, I had to do the elegant dance. And then you have the witch, which is very harsh, you know. So, but even when you have very harsh, be careful. Don't let everything the same intensity of harshness, you know. So if you have areas that are closer to bone structure, naturally you feel that you can add more sharper areas. When you start getting to the fat pads or muscle areas, you can soft a little. Again, like it's this dance of contrast. If everything's sharp, there's no contrast. If everything's soft, no contrast. We all saw sculptures like this, right? That just feels that like a blob, or it feels like the person just like, right? But when you have that contrast, that dance of soft and sharp, that's gold.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And I love this page for another specific reason here, just with, Leticia's work here is just spectacular. But on the left here with the witch, it's also, she's utilizing really sharp shapes to convey the character too. Like that in itself tells a story. You immediately know that this character is no good. This character is up to no good. It's a bad character, and I just love how that's demonstrated in the sculpt. And as far as like the tightness of like lines and things like that, in a 2D drawing, there's like the weight of that stroke. It's like thicker and thinner. In 3D, to me, it's just like Leticia's saying, how soft it is to how tight, and always finding ways to just grade things out. Never have that consistent flow all the way through your stroke. Find ways to like add some variety to it,
Let
for sure.
people's brains connect to the
Exactly.
dots, and in 3D is awesome because you can just test it out. Like, oh, I'm gonna smooth here and see how it feels, this connection. Oh, I lost too much. Let me add a little back of the sharpness, So you can play with that. Again, like if one of my favorite words of all times is contrast. You gotta figure it out, like where I'm finding those contrasts of softs and sharps, curves and straights and all the good stuff.
All right, find an appeal. I want Leticia to speak to this, but one thing I just want to offer is it is subjective, right? Like what is appealing? Like everyone's going to have a different idea of that. But I think, part of the magic that we're trying to do here is, you look at a drawing and you immediately see an appeal. There's something very likable about a drawing that's really executed in a way that you love, right? Bringing that to life in the round and finding those opportunities to me is a really challenging task. And I just think Macy here from CBS is a perfect example. And Leticia, please.
Yeah, so, I was working on this with Tony Fucile. For those of you who don't know, he created this design of The Incredibles. So he's incredible. And, for me, my job, a very hard job, is how do I give that life that he puts on paper to my models? And the answer is something that I actually learned in games when I was working at Blizzard. And I told you guys earlier, is a lot of it's not staying the lines, but staying on the feeling. So even if like, this distance feels very similar to the drawing, but I'm not having the same feeling, I push it 5-10% more, sometimes 20%, until I'm feeling that, And so you kind of, again, you got to accept that you are a designer, not a copy machine, to be able to make those decisions, right? And where do we find those informations? A lot of it is taking classes, right? Getting yourself into the designer mindset, And a lot of times we don't learn those things as 3D artists. We're like, here's your concept, do it equal. No, right? That's not how it goes. And you might find some clients like that, and that's fine. But for the most part, a lot of times, as an artist, they're hiring you to bring that life back to 3D, right? That is on the paper, and you got to figure it out how to do that in 3D. Like Charles said, like appeal is a bit subjective, but at the same time, when you study design, there's almost like those clues that you start putting together, and things just like starts being appealing, even if it's a very simple thing, it's a very complicated. You find those appeals because of those set of ideas, let's say.
All right. So we developed a character in a relaxed pose, and I wanted to include this because to me, this is something that I've kind of learned to do over the years. Now, in production, there's this aspect of like a T pose and A pose type of thing, but it's such a technical way to think about your character. And, you know, one thing Leticia and I like to do is just relax your character. What is your character going to be like? You know, just arms down. Like when I stand here, you kind of get a sense of me if I'm slouching or if my chest is out. You know, like there's already an opportunity there. And it helps me understand how shapes kind of cooperate with each other. You know, so I get a better statement of the character.
Yeah.
So we'll tend to start here. It's a great launch point to do further exploration in the form of poses and things like that we'll get into here right now.
Yeah, depending if you're in production sometimes also, you know, and you don't have time to do crazy poses, just relaxing your character a little bit, you know, maybe your character's a bit shy, so instead of doing this, let me go here. Instead of doing this, if your character's shy, rotate the feet in a little bit, maybe he's holding his hands like this. It's like, there's so much you can do with a simple pose.
Yes.
You know, you just gotta, again, you gotta get into the vibe of your character. Go beyond the concept. Who is this person, you know? And you can still do something that is quite fast to do in 3D, but you're giving story. Story is everything for that character, right? Sorry.
No. Just... All right. So what does a typical delivery look like with, you know, a character? And I love this example of Sarah because this kind of shows like a lot of the whole gauntlet here. You know, you have your more relaxed, just arms down pose, and she might be like a little bit more rigid, but it kind of speaks to her there. You'll do some kind of exploration of expressions, you know, anything to break symmetry to just start conveying the character. And then, of course, a page that just has like a nice thought out pose that's thoughtful and showing it from a few different angles.
Yeah, that's what I did. Well, one thing also, when you have to do like a basic pose like this, the word is contrapposto, right? Mm-hmm. So if your character is standing, again, perfect distribution of weight. If your character is more like on that, there is a vibe to it. But if I do this, there's a different vibe, right? Just a little contrapposto. It's like my shoulders going down,
little shift in
my
weight.
hips is going up a little bit. Different line. Good example, David or Michelangelo. What do you know how to do? Do David. That's how you do it.
Yes. Just introducing that little bit of asymmetry.
Yep.
All right, so here's just some more examples of this. And when I was working on Jacob, I think the motivation for me was I was working closely with the story team as well. So I was able to really see a lot of what was happening like in the beats. And we wanted to make sure we captured this in the sculpt as well and conveyed him in different scenarios. Like Leticia, I was working really closely with Tony. And Tony's just, when you're working with Tony, you bring your A game as best you can, you know. And so we knew there was a lighthearted component to Jacob, as we see on the left. We know he's a brute. He's very strong and can be that kind of that strong silent type. That's him sitting down. Just simply relaxed. That's just more like just a basic default pose. But then the one on the right is probably my favorite of him because it was really meant to kind of capture how he was looking at Macy. And I wanted to really get that warmth out of him. And, you know, I did my best. But this is the kinds of things that we'll always try to do. And I wish I had this in a turntable mode. We should have brought this stuff. But the idea with this stuff, too, is it works in every angle. You know, you can just move this around, and we know that the pose is going to be supported. So what's after just posing for full body? Well, expressions, you know, and, you know, we saw some examples with Sarah. Here's some of the stuff that we did with Jacob. And I think with all this stuff, you want to think two things. You want to think in extremes, you know, a squash, a stretch type of thing. You also want to think in just a little bit of range in terms of personality. Like, what are the things we can do? Sometimes it's really vast in terms of what that means, depending on the character. Other times it could be very subtle. You know, I think a good example of subtle is bottom left. You know, you get a lot from just that kind of gaze that he has there, but the deformation, the push and pull in the sculpt is really not any kind of heavy lifting. And then, of course, supporting the different angles. You know, we want to make sure we show this stuff.
One thing also about expression that I learned from Aaron Blaise, and it just clicked with me, is the idea of expansion what's the opposite? Contraction. I don't know how to speak. So think about like what kind of emotion. There's just two things. The emotions. The emotions is expansion, or is it contracting, right? And that clicked with me. Like it's like I'm thinking about the emotions of my character, and every time I'm doing something, if it is he's a bit tense, contraction, how I'm gonna put this in the face. Expansion, again, is like open, and then you start expanding those lines, expanding the face. And it's just like for me, it just clicked. Like I know how to do this now. You know what I mean? It's like the simplest way to think about expressions, basically.
That's actually, I think, a great, very clear way to explain that. What else do these models basically provide? These sculpts provide, and this is a great example. Leticia, maybe speak on this one. But you know, the idea here is once you have a finished sculpt. That could be used for other visual development artists to do their magic. You know, in this case, here's a costume pass on Macy. We've even seen our characters used in things like story reels. Well, they'll just take like copy and paste what we have, put it in their shots, and it's like an easy template for them to use.
Yeah, here's a work of Celine Kim, and we worked together on Macy to just kind of like, I gave her some views of the model, and she was just designing. She's an amazing artist. You should all follow her. She's amazing. And she was just playing with designs for the clothing, and then whatever she was like feeling it, I'll go back to 3D, do a quick block out, give it back to her. She would detail. Again, VizDev is a lot of back and forth from 2D, 3D, 2D, 3D. Yeah.
All right. So what groom and look development, this comes up a lot in terms of how involved we are with this. I would say as involved as we need to be. And usually we'll make that choice at the beginning if we know where we're going to take the character, how far we're going to go. There's always that aspect. This speaks to the generalist, you know, mentality, like utilizing different disciplines to your advantage. For Jacob early on, we knew that there was going to be a scruff to him, and so I definitely did multiple grooms for him. But the fun thing about it is it's another way to kind of inch even closer to something that's more visualized, more final, that the director and people can try to get excited about and maybe see beyond what's on the page. So this is definitely something that I think we both would highly encourage, but it's always case by case.
Yeah, it can be very time consuming too.
Yes,
so.
Very time consuming. You got to be definitely plan accordingly. The other aspect of look development is just texturing, right? And as you've been seeing in some of these examples, both Leticia and I really use texture and color a lot. It's so informative for me. You know, even in the early block-in stage, we'll introduce color oftentimes sooner than you might think, simply because my eye can see relationships a lot sooner. You know, I mean, just not only with contrast the shapes, but it helps me understand distances between shapes too.
And even in overall, like when we're doing stylized, color is so important in all stages, right? Because depending on the simplification, it's just such a simple shape that when you add color, you add a little bit of a like redness or yellows and greens, you start bringing a little more complexity to something very basic on grayscale, right?
That's right. This is non-related to anything we did on Seabeast, but it is a task that we have at times. And this is an example of when we're asked to basically provide kind of mechanical fundamentals for things like hands. I think hands to me are the next most emotive thing of a character beyond the face, right? They're the other most expressive thing. So providing some clarity and rules and structure on that that works in the round, that we know it's not just a drawing that's beautiful, but something that we can move around and feed downstream. It's really helpful.
And just to compliment what Charles is saying, like one of the biggest things I see sometimes that people, obviously the face is the most important part of a character, but people don't treat their hands well. You gotta take care of your hands. You gotta give expression, because like Charles said, it's the second most important part of your character. So give your hands some love, okay?
That's right. I need to lotion
yes,
later.
Not great.
All right, now earlier we touched on iterations. We're not kidding when we say iterations. On the far left, it was the very first version of Ruby that we did on Gilman's. And on the far right is basically the last thing that I had the privilege to touch and kind of present. And there's a whole lot of in between. Now, sometimes the strokes are really vast. Sometimes it's completely different ideas. I was working with Tim Lamb on this, and Tim and I, have worked on many productions together alongside Leticia as well. And when you start to get an understanding for how the 2D designer works with their shapes and their lines, you really can understand how to apply it. And the motivation here is always to just, basically try your best to bring the character to life. As you get a little bit closer to the finish line, sometimes the changes are just really incremental. It could be the shape of an eye, the shape of a face, the scale of ears, little things like that. But all, moving along. And what's not really shown here is that there could be other characters in development by other artists that are doing the same thing, and it's all inching along the same thing. And I said thing 3 times in that sentence. Okay. All right. So this is, we'll both speak to this here, but basically the idea here is, we build out a lineup, and why is this important? Because we want to show context. We want to show continuity with the characters. Consistency. There has to be some evolution of the shape language, all kind of fitting and feeling right. Characters feeling like from the same world. I love both these examples because on the top you have something that, even though it's still really stylized, it's more naturalistic, a little, very different from what is happening on the bottom, which was from Ruby Gilman. And so it works the same way, and this is a big motivation that both of us will have to provide just this ongoing kind of growing lineup, really. And, it speaks to scale, and it always, almost always, has impact to other characters. One character could be done, Leticia will come in, knock something out the park with another character, and there'll be something there that we discovered that might need to go back to the other character and introduce. So this is the kind of ebb and flow that is constantly happening.
And it's interesting because on the top image, it was Charles and myself. We work on this show, just the 2 of us. So again, it's 2 artists to manage a style, right? But sometimes you have a team of 6, 8 artists, and that's how even more important for you to have other people's models in your scene to make sure you're creating consistency on your model. And always present your model with the models that already exist. Yes. So they can be oh, the way you did this detail here, I don't know, on the nose, we could bring it back to this one, So it's almost like you learn, right? Every character you do, you learn more things. And you want to bring those things back, or else it becomes
it'll lose that
disconnect. Exactly.
Yeah, it'll disconnect. All right. Present with pride. I mean, you've kind of seen some examples here of what that might look like, at least in the way that Leticia and I approach it. I'd like to always, showcase the work that we do in kind of a polished piece, something that represents a page that we're showing. You always have the model on the side in a package like ZBrush, and maybe you're going to do a little 3D tour or something like that. But I think presenting it in a way that just is thoughtful, that gives insight to your thought process a little bit, and also just is like a showpiece for them to potentially even use in their own presentations when they're still shopping around their project. These are all things that really come in useful. And yeah, I know for myself, I really value this stage quite a bit.
I'm gonna say something very important. Okay, I'm being serious. Shape, especially digitally, is perceived by light. We cannot touch what we sculpting in ZBrush or Blender or whatever. So a thing that I say a lot of people that are modeling, you have to have a basic understanding on how to emphasize your shape with light. How many times we've seen work where you see the model is very good and then someone puts in a lighting scene and you're like, whoa,
yeah,
I lost, it's all flat, That's because that person is not thinking about how am I going to emphasize my shapes, okay? So this is very serious because, again, you might do a model and you're like, I put lighting and it's supposed to look better, but it actually doesn't. That's because you have to do a little bit of studying of lighting to get the sense of how I'm going to emphasize my shapes for perception with the light, okay? And a lot of us, we have to, again, take lighting lessons and photography and things, find online tutorials, so we can understand how I'm going to emphasize my shapes for presentation, okay?
That's right. Tell a story. Okay, Leticia.
All right, this is my personal work. So for me, you know, when I'm not working with the mouse, I'd like to do personal work. And the goal for me is always to tell a little cute story, you know? And that's what makes me alive. That's what I live for, is just telling little pieces of story. And one thing I suggest for you all is to think about what is that for you. It might not be storytelling. It might be something else, right? But for me, that's what keeps me happy, independent where I work. I'm just doing my personal work, telling my little stories with my little fairies, and be happy, you know? So a job is great. Do not put all your needs into your job. They're never gonna fulfill it. And it's not fair to your job for you to expect to fill your hole. So my suggestion is always find what makes you happy, do it on your personal time, and get the rest of fulfillment if you don't get from your work, from your job, on your free time. And that's what I do, independent where I work, and it worked for me.
That's right. That's right. And I love these pieces. You know, obviously, beautiful work by Leticia here. But the one thing I think for some of you aspiring to enter this kind of field and things like that, oftentimes I'll look at different portfolios, and one of the things that I always find might be lacking there, like you can see that person's right on the cusp of being where they need to be, and there's a lack of narrative with the character. It's not registering in a way that the person looking at it really connects with it. And I love this because let's just say even if I took this character right here out of this picture and just had her with that cute little creature and she's feeding that creature, even if you took the environment out, it's still telling a story. Think about that. Next time you're taking on your next, personal project, you want to amp up the quality of your portfolio, that's a great way to do it.
That's one thing that, just to say more about what Charles said, is I also learned from Aaron Blaise, which is think in action. Like, just don't think, oh, this is a cool design, my character's like this, holding a sword. It's like, think what's gonna bring more story to that. What if the character's like has a very low face and the sword's in the back like this, like he's ready to chop some monster's head? That's a completely different vibe than doing those 3D characters that's like, you know what I mean? It's just like, it gives more storytelling. People are gonna look at your piece and they're gonna connect. They're gonna feel it, It's about feeling. And a lot of it, my experience, because I always search story in my work since I was a student. We all still students, but when I was in school, let's say, for me, it was always about storytelling. And it's funny because Charles, he was the one who hired me at DreamWorks when we were young, remember? And I remember because I showed my piece, and he saw the model and he thought it was good, but he went beyond. He's like, what kind of story were you telling here? What happened? And this and that, because like you connect with the person that is looking your work, because we're humans, we're story people, we think that way. So it's also a great way for you to connect with other people,
That's right. That's right. All right, let's move on here. Now we do have a couple secret weapons here. So both of us have been educators for a long time. Leticia has not only, provided like amazing tutorials to the community, but just involved with schoolism. I've been with Annam School for, my gosh, 100 years, it feels like now. I used to teach at the Art Center as well, but the reason we wanted to highlight this is because it kind of speaks to the way we exercise our craft. And I know for myself, hearing myself talk through my process has really helped me keep the pencil sharp, And even when you're giving critiques to students, sometimes you're jumping between so many different styles of characters that the students are working on, and it really activates my brain to really think about all the rules that I'm preaching to them. And what I've discovered over the years is that, okay, I might actually know a little bit what I'm talking about. Like I might actually know something, but more importantly, it really provides me with a lot of inspiration. I love working with the next wave of talent, And, for me, this is really important for me, 100%.
Yeah. And teaching also is not about like teaching in schools or sometimes teaching to your friend, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
like if you learn something, you saw a tutorial of someone, when you're teaching, again, that teaching process is a step of solidifying your thought. And sometimes the way your brain works is different from your friend for the most part. So something clicked with you and you explain it, he's like, oh, I don't know. And then you have to think a different way to explain that. Or you even might think, maybe I don't know exactly what I'm talking about. And then you got to go, after. So one of the things is like, whatever you learn, teach if you have the chance, show it to someone.
Yes.
Again, that is just, our brain takes the steps of solidifying information. Teaching is a big step. Like you can do little ones doing by yourself. When you teach, you do a big step forward.
Yeah. Secret weapon number 2, personal work. I can't stress this enough, and even as working professionals, sometimes it's hard to find the time. If you have families, we all have lives, right? Everyone has stuff going on. But I think keeping that fire in your belly to just do your own work is really important. And I think, for me and Leticia, it's also a platform where we get to explore different things that we might not be doing in our day-to-day. Take on a new craft, learn something new. Maybe it's taking a stab at Blender, which I think I need to start doing that. But the point here is that this is another way for you to stay sharp.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in the industry, and who's in here in the industry? There's a few, but
This is some industry.
yeah, there's
back
some. There's sometimes the idea of getting complacent. You get kind of set in your ways. You're employed. You're doing your thing. What I think is happening there is a little bit missed opportunity to take yourself out of what you're doing in your day-to-day and push yourself to just grow as an artist. It's only going to make you more valuable.
And it doesn't need to be big growth. Like for me, like I work 8-9 hours. What I like to do sometimes, like, okay, I try to do an hour a day, an hour and a half if I can. And I'm like, okay, what's my main goal here? Tell a story. That's for me, right? So in my heart is always the primary thing is to tell a story. All right, what is my second goal here? Oh, maybe I'm going to exercise maybe some X-Gen. I'm going to test some hair on this piece. Or maybe I'm going to try a completely different lighting. So you don't need much. You don't need to take a huge step. It might be like 2% that you're studying and trying a new thing. So your next project, you can do 10% more.
Yes.
And
Yes.
sometimes there's no percent. And you're just solidifying again information. It's not it's not linear, right? We all know it's like, okay, man, woo, 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 kind of over there, go up. That's the life of an artist. So the personal work, it's where you learn to be your art director.
Yeah.
It's where you learn to be your own designer, right? It's where you learn new skills. So even if you're like, oh, I'm working, I'm tired, try to create a consistency of at least 3 times a week, do something. It might be half an hour if you're tired. It might be 2 hours if you're feeling it. I have my friend here, Prashan. We have a... Get up. No, I'm joking.
Get up and introduce yourself, please. No.
Prashan, we have a Discord channel. And then when I'm feeling like I should be studying, but I don't have the energy, I join the channel because everyone's studying there. So we start chatting and studying together. And then when I see that piece I did, the little bird, I did all on the Discord with Prashan and other friends of ours because you don't feel it. You're just chatting and then I'm like, hey, look at this. What do you think? So if you're someone like me that kind of like feeds on that idea of being around people, we can do that. Just find your tribe, your people.
That's right. And, one more thing to speak to this. How many have, started projects and don't finish them? I mean, everybody, right? I have endless on my hard drive at home. I think there's so much value to that. It's okay. You're getting back on the bike, you're riding around the block. That's really what it is. You're exercising, right? So I often tell students, every term that I'm teaching, don't just rely on what you're learning in a class or what you're doing at work. You got to make that time, to kind of get on the bike, ride around the block, even if you don't finish the whole ride that you want to do.
Right.
It's okay, because you're exercising.
One thing very important. How many of us take a tutorial, watch 3 hours? I'm like, I'm good. I don't need to do anything. I learned a bunch. And then the next day, you forgot 90%, right? So the way, the metrics, at least for me, that I found is 20/80. So it's like, if I have 1 hour, 20 minutes going to be watching the tutorial, 40 minutes going to be doing something, 1 hour, whatever it is. Give more time to the doing, less time to the watching. Watching, much more comfortable. You're like, oh yeah, I know everything. No, you don't. You got to put into practice. That's
right.
how we solidify content, is doing it.
That's right.
So don't trick yourselves. I do this every day. When you're watching tutorials, get a little bite, go do a bunch. Get that thing in your brain, next. You know what I mean?
That's right. Thank you for listening.